Shruti Shruti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Kritau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punah Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavat Vyapta Dehaye Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Om Nama Pranavarthaye Shuddha Jnanaikamurtaye Nirmalaya Prashantaye Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Adya Sanskrit Sambhashana Varge एतत् मन्त्रस्य अर्थं जानीमः।
अस्तु जी, अस्तु जी। न नरेणावरेण प्रोक्त एषः
न नरेणावरेण प्रोक्त एषः
विज्ञेयो बहुधा चिन्त्यमानः
विज्ञेयो बहुधा चिन्त्यमानः
अनन्यप्रोक्ते गतिरत्र नास्ति
अनन्यप्रोक्ते गतिरत्र नास्ति
मणीयान् ह्यतर्कम् अनुप्रमाणात् Shikara took up the straightforward meaning that this is not a jnanam which we can gain when it is unfolded by somebody who is either not a Shrotriya or not a Brahmanishta. Either way, there's a problem. If he is not a Shrotriya, he would not be able to use the methodology which is available because he would not know. You learn it as a part of the tradition. Therefore, there will always be incompleteness in the understanding of the jnanam. And if he's not a Brahmanistha, then also there is a problem. In fact, there is a greater problem. Because then he is not one who understands the aikyam of the self and Brahman. There is nothing else. Only such a person can unfold that knowledge. Therefore, avarena narena proktaha, this knowledge is not possible to get correctly. And there are so many, therefore you have so many interpretations, so many ways people look at it. In fact, when Bhashyakara starts the Bhashyam for Bhagavad Gita, he says, the reason I start this Bhashyam is because there are so many interpretations of this. Anybody who knows the language, and Sanskritam, like any other language, is open to interpretation. Words are open to interpretation. You interpret it any way you think based on your own knowledge, experience, and conclusions. So there are many varieties of imagined, derived interpretation of this knowledge. Bahuda Chintyamana. Then he said that the only way you gain this knowledge is through the teaching of somebody who is a Shrotriya Brahmanistha. Ananya Prokte Gatiratra Nasti. Then there is no problem. And this Acharya explains, which we saw yesterday, that the one who is a Shrotriya Brahmanishtha, when he or she unfolds this knowledge, then all this various doubts, is there, not there, Shuddhi, Ashuddhi, Karta, all these things, the doubts are not there at all. But it has to be by somebody who has clarity about the aikyam between the I and Brahman, which is the only thing. Acharya doesn't stop there. He goes on to give us another possible interpretation. Not interpretation, another possible meaning for this two key words, Ananya and Gatihi. Like I said, both are open to understanding correctly or incorrectly. Ananya especially, in the Gita, many times people interpret Ananya Bhakti as saying, Bhagavan saying, only have bhakti to me. Don't pray to anybody else. Don't pray to any other God. Which is not really the answer, not the meaning. It can be thought like Ananya, Anyat na. So you can think of it saying, Bhagavan being very, or Lord Krishna in the case of Bhagavad Gita, he's being very selfish or possessive and saying, don't pray to anybody else, pray only to me. That's not a correct thing. Because there are other verses in the Gita which they will use to buttress their argument. Ananya Shintayanto Mam Ejana Paripasate. So don't think of anybody else or anything else. Think only of me. That me is Ishvara, Parameshvara. But if we misinterpret it as my form of Parameshvara, in that case, Lord Krishna, then you'll become ISKCON. Then your mind is simply closed. So Ananya has to be understood correctly. So one interpretation Acharya gives is, Ananya is one who recognizes the non-difference between I and Brahman, Atma, everything. He gives another possible way of looking at it. Ultimately, the meaning is the same. Whichever way you look at it, the correct meaning is the same. But he does give us, he does that many times in the Bashyam. Acharya will take it up, and maybe at that time there were people who were questioning, why can't it be like this? Why can't it be? We have all these Purva-Pakshis giving their own interpretations. That he takes them up and makes sure that they're addressed. So maybe there were people who were looking at this and saying, why can't we look at it like this? Although that question itself is not there, Acharya gives those answers. So the first answer is that Sarva Vikalpa Gati Pratyashtimatvat Atmanaha. Astamitvat. All doubts put to rest. But another way of, he says, Athava
अथवा
Atma Bhute
स्वात्मभूते
Anyasmin Atmani
Anyasmin
आत्मनि
Ananyasmit Atmani
अनन्यस्मिन् आत्मनि
Prokte
प्रोक्ते
Ananya Prokte
अन्यप्रोक्ते
Gatihi Atra Anya Avagatihi Nasti
गतिः अन्य अवगतिर्नास्ति
Yeyasya Anyasya Abhavat.
ज्ञेयस्य अन्यस्य अभावात्.
Ananya, he is now saying, if you look at it saying that there is Ekameva Advitiya Vastu. Therefore, there is no Anya, no other. That being the self, Swatma Bhute, that being the self, Athava, alternately, Anasnyasmin Atmani Prokte, This Ananya Prokta is Ananyasmin Atmani Prokta. Asmin Atmani, which doesn't, there's no way of looking at a second Atma. Atma is Atma, period. So, Eka Atma is Ananyasmin Atmani. And in that Atma Prokte, of that Atma Prokte, that Ananya Prokte, if that is understood like that, Ananya Prokte, Gatihi Atra, Gati here is understanding, knowledge. Anya Avagatihi Nasti. There is no room for any other understanding, any other type of understanding. Why? There is nothing else. How can you understand any other way? Atma is Ananya. And that Atma has to be I, because I am also Ananya. Or I is also Ananya. Therefore, Nyayasya Anyasya Bhavat. It is Ekameva Advitiyam. There is no second. There is no I separately and an Atma separately. Atma understanding, after having gone through a certain amount of study and known it to be Akhanda, Avyaya, Ityadi, Ityadi, in third person, as Prathama Purusha, when you understand it as Uttama Purusha, that is I. That I is the same as the Atma. And the more you understand this, more clear it becomes. There is no other way of looking at it. That I is the one Advitiya Atma. Therefore, since there is no second Advitiyam, there is no question of any other understanding. So that's the second way he looks at the word Ananya. Athava Swatma Bhute Ananyasmin Atmani Prokte. Talking of this Ananya Atma, first one interpretation was that Prokta, the teacher, is Ananya. He is clarity of the fact that I is that Brahman, there is no other. Here, the subject Atma, which we are trying to understand, is Ananya. Ananya Atmani Prokte, Ananya Prokte Gatihi Atra, Anya Avagatihi, that's the other way of understanding it. Why? Because Nyayasya Anyasya Abhavat. There is no other object to be known. See, at this understanding of Advaita, all those three, the Triputi, Jnanam, Jnayam, and Jnata, there is no separate Jnata, there is no separate Jnayam, there is no separate Jnanam. This is what we are trying to understand. Thinker, object of thought, thought. All of them are dependent on the Atma. We see them when we look at it from the perspective of the Jagat, of Samsara. But when you see it from the point of view of the Atma, there's only Atma. So you variously say, Jnanam, Jnayam, Jnana, Jnata, all merge. There's no merging. They all are nothing but Atma. Atma is none of them. But they are all Atma. Because there is only one Vastu. There is no separate Jnata. In fact, in Mandikya Upanishad, Karika very categorically says, where is Shishya, where is Guru? That is the other level of understanding. There is no Guru, no Shishya, no teaching, no nothing. But till I reach that state, I need that separate Guru, I need the separate Ishvara, I need the separate concept of I. And the whole teaching is to negate all of that. There is only Ekameva Advitiya Brahman, which is I. There being nothing else, Anyasya Abhavat, there's nothing else to know. That's why you get all these statements like, that which, when known, it is as though you know everything. What does that mean? Once I understand the truth of I as Ekameva Advitiya Brahman, because I am now looking at it from a Paramarthika perspective, then all these others, which are Samsarika perspective, are already known, because they're all dependent karya. Therefore, you get these statements like, knowing which is as though everything is known. Knowing which, there's nothing more to know. Which is a statement you cannot make about anything in the Jagat. Any knowledge other than the knowledge of the Atma, nobody can make a statement, there is nothing more to know. There's always something to know. No scientist who has worked a lot, and we have some scientists amongst us, who have worked a lot in a particular field, they know more and more and more and more of less and less and less. But they can never get up and say, now I know everything. And even something that we think we know, somebody else will come up with something else. That is the nature of our knowledge of the Jagat. But this is one knowledge. Atma Jnanam, Moksha Jnanam, where one can make very categorical statement. There is nothing more to know. No, but you don't know Swahili. You may not know Swahili. But you don't need to know. Why should you know Swahili? There's nothing more to know because there is nothing else. Whether it's Swahili or Russian, they all something which is samsarika, which is dependent on Atma. So you can easily make the statement. There's nothing more to know. Nyeyasya anyasya abhavat. There is nothing other than this as a nyeya vastu. So many places Bhagavan says, I am the nyeya vastu. That's why we hear things like, even in the verse we says, Sastrana Manusheshu Kaschid Veti Mam Tattvataha. One who knows me means knows I, knows Brahman, because they're all the same. There is no second vastu. Aham, Atma, Brahma, Om, all just the same. Therefore, if you know Ishvara Tattvataha, you know everything. If you know I Tattvataha, you know everything. Because Tattvamasi. Jnanasya hi esha parakashta
Jnanasya hyesha para nishtha
yadatmaikatvam tattva vijnanam
yadatmaikatvam
Jnanam.
jnanasya hi esha parakashta. This is the limit of knowledge. Sometimes people have interpreted Vedanta as the end of knowledge. Vedasya antaha. But we know that Vedanta refers to the end portion of the Veda. But it is not a completely wrong way of looking at it. It's the ultimate knowledge. Limit of knowledge, knowing which one doesn't have to know anything else. one has to do nothing else. Oh, there is so much to know in this Jagat. That is only from the perspective of being within the Jagat. There's so much to know. I have a whole library full of books. I've read only part of it. There's so much more to read, so much more to understand, so much more to know. Not necessary. Knowing that one vastu, it is as though everything is known. The entire library is known. You may not specifically know a particular book, you may not have read it, doesn't matter. There is nothing more to know. So parakashta. Jnanasya hi esha parakashta. The end, the upper limit, the top, nothing else after this. Yad atma ekatvam vijnanam. Once you understand the aikyam, that there is only one vastu, atma, aham. That is known, that's the end of it, there is nothing more to know. Jnanasya hi esha parakashta yad atma ekatvam vijnanam. Ataha
Atah
avagantavya abhavat
Avagantavya
अवगन्तव्याभावात्
gatihi atra avishyate
न
Gatihi
गतिः
Atra
अत्र अविशिष्यते
Avishyate.
There is no viparita jnanam. It is so clear because that's all there is to know. Yat atmaikatvam vijnanam atah avagantavya abhavat na gatihi atra avashishyate. There is no nothing else. In the first case, he interpreted gati as one which has no doubt. I have understood and there is no doubt. There is no doubt in the understanding. A lot of mananam has been done. All doubts planted in my head by myself and by others have been resolved. There are no doubt. That's why I like the word used. Astamitatvat. Everything is set. Here he says the gati can be interpreted as there being nothing else left to know. Therefore, there is no viparita bhava. See, when viparita bhava means other way of looking at things. No, Atma is not there. Normally what happens is when that is not the truth, that's not the real truth, the reality, then because one somewhere in the back of the mind knows that it is viparita bhava, there is a tendency to defend it. And since the basis is not there for defense, there is no pramana to back you, one tends to defend it with certain vehemence. Whereas if I think I know I've understood the truth because the Guru has taught, but I'm still having a lot of doubt because of my own previous experiences, it's different. Or somebody else has fed me something which sounds logical. This logic is a business we will talk about more because Yamadharma Raja will talk about this logic quite a lot. But we need to be able to figure things out in a way in which our mind is clear. So one aspect is when Shastra tells you, you are Ishvara. Lots of doubts will come. How can I be Ishvara? Then somebody will come and put some ideas into your head. Something you read, something you heard, something somebody has given an argument. Those are doubts. all those doubts can be cleared when taught by a Ananya Prukta. Doubt must come. And doubt must be cleared. But if you get a wrong understanding, then it looks as if there's no doubt. But that's only because you know somewhere at the back of the mind, this is a wrong understanding, and you defend it tooth and nail. He says that is also not there. Atra gatihi na avashishyate. There is no way that this kind of problem will arise. So this is second interpretation he gives. Ananya, first interpretation is the Vakta, the Acharya, the Upadishta. What he tells is one interpretation. The second interpretation, Ananya, is the matter being discussed is Ananya. And therefore, there is no possibility of any other way of looking at it. And therefore, in the first case, he says, the Gati removes all the doubts. The second case, he says, there is no openness for a Viparita Bhava at all. So, two ways he said how we can look at Ananya and how we look at Gati. He continues. Gati, Gati is going. But in the context of this, Gati is understanding, knowledge. So he gives another way of looking at the Gati. Third interpretation. Sansara Gati va atra nasti ananye atmani prokte antariyakatvat tad vijnana phalasya mokshasya. Our normal experience with learning anything is we learn something, then we put it into practice, and then we see the result. Anything you take. I learn how to do Sandhyavandanam or any other yajna. That yajna, then I do. So Sandhyavandanam, immediately after the Upanayanam, the Pandit will teach you, or somebody, some elder will teach you, do like this, like this, like this, like this. Then you actually do it. And then hopefully you get the result. Sometime later. But here, samsara gatihi va. What is the gati that you're looking for? By doing so many things, including Nachiketa Agnihi, something is going to happen later. Any doing will produce a phala which comes later. It comes in this janma, after this janma, next janma, we don't know. That is gati, travel. So, samsara gatihi atra nasti. That kind of travel which was promised by the karmakanda, that is not there. I learned to do something. Somebody does putra kameshti yajna. The couple has been married for a while, no children. They want a child. They go back to the Shastra. The Guru says, you do Putra Kameshti Yajna. They go to somebody who knows Putra Kameshti Yajna, who teaches them Putra Kameshti Yajna. Then they do the Putra Kameshti Yajna. And soon they have a child. This is the process. That is Gati. Somebody says, I know that there is something called other lokas. I want to go to a loka. How do I do? So he goes to somebody who understands Shastra, teaches him what is the Nachiketa Agni, what is the yajna you should do. He does all the yajna. So, know, do, and gain the result at 3 different points of time. There is Gati. Then at the end of it, he travels to another loka post the fall of the body. Yes. Here, samsara gatihi va atra nasti. Otherwise, alternately looking at it, va samsara gatihi nasti. There is no gati. Because ananye atmani prokte. How? Again, he goes back to what he said earlier, first 2 meanings of ananya. Said by a Brahmanishta of Ananya Atma. What does he say? He only says Ekamaeva Advitiyam Brahman, Atma. That Ananya Atma, when taught, when Upadesha is given by that Ananya Prokta, when that is done like that, Ananye Atmani Prokte na Antariyakatvat. What happens? You have, when such a teacher gives Upadesha and teaches, already he said, doubts disappear and there is no possibility of a Viparita Bhava. Then what happens? Oh, I have learned something, now I have to wait for something to happen. No. There is no antaral. It happens right as you learn. It is the only thing in any religion, anywhere, including Hinduism, where it is not a promise for the future. It is, the very jnanam is moksha. They are non-separate. It's not that I gain the jnanam and then sometime later in the future I am going to gain moksha. That jnanam is moksha. Jnanam eva moksha. So, na antariyakatvat. No gap. I don't have to do putrakameshti again and wait that I will have a child. I don't have to do anything which then I have to wait for the result. The knowledge is the result. There's no gap between Vijnana Phalasya and Mokshasya. That Vijnana Phalam is moksha, right? That Jnanam is moksha. In fact, not even Jnana Phalam, Jnanam is moksha. It's not a phalam which you can hope I will get sometime in the future. Therefore, another way of looking at this is samsara gatihi va atra nasti. There is no movement, no travel. There is no time gap. There is nowhere to go. There is nothing to do. There is nothing to gain. It is already gained. It is already there. It is existent. There is no distance between this jnanam and moksha. Jnanam is moksha. Therefore, that's another way of looking at this 2 words, ananya and gatihi. Like I said, reason he's giving all these different things, somebody must have questioned. Why can't it be like this? Why can't you think of it like this? In other places, you will see in Bashyam, he also says what the Purva Pakshi might be asking. Here we are extrapolating or interpolating to say that somebody must have asked like that. So here's another way of looking at it. Yet another way of looking at Gati, Acharya comes up with. Athava
Kathava
Prochyamana Brahmatma Bhutena
प्रोच्यमान
ब्रह्मात्मभूतेन
ब्रह्मात्मभूतेन
आचार्येण
आचार्येण
अनन्यतया प्रोक्ते
अनन्यतया प्रोक्ते
आत्मनि अगतिः
आत्मनि
आत्मनि
अगतिः
अगतिः
अनवबोधः
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 परिज्ञानमत्र नास्ति.
परिज्ञानमत्र
परिज्ञानमत्र
नास्ति
नास्ति.
Another way of looking at this is say, अथवा when taught by a Kshotriya Brahmanistha, Vrochyamana Brahmatma Bhutena Acharyena. That Acharya very clearly, who is a Kshotriya Brahmanistha, by him taught Acharyena, Ananyataya Prokte, when there is taught, Advaita is taught, then there is no chance for misunderstanding, wrong understanding, doubts coming up again and again. Prokte Atmani Agatihi, non-understanding is not possible. Agatihi Nasti. Because earlier he said Agati as Gati, travel, and Agati must be non-travel. Here he explains that Agati can also mean Anavabodha, non-understanding. Aparijnanam, not knowing. Atra Nasti. When you have such a guru to unfold it for you, Acharyavan Purusha Veda, our own Shastra tells us, one who has such an Acharya, who is Shrotriya Brahmanistha, there is no element of any uncertainty that I will get it. You will get it. When will I get it? Achireda. In time, depending upon one's own readiness and depending upon one's own level of commitment. That assurance is there from Shastra itself. Therefore, he says, Uchimana Brahmabhutena Acharyena Ananyataya Prokte Atmani Agatihi Nasti. Anavabodaha Nasti. Aparijnanam Atra Nasti. There is no Agatihi. And here the word he uses Agatihi Nasti. If you look at the text itself, Ananya Prokte Agatihi Atra Nasti is what it says. You know, if you look at the previous way of looking at this, then it can't be Ananya Prokte Agatihi Atra Nasti. That will mean there is no non-travel. That's not what he's saying. He says there is no travel. Therefore, there he interprets it as Ananya Prokte Gatihi Atra Nasti. Sandhi rules allow you to do all this. But if you interpret it Ananya Prokte Agatihi Atra Nasti, means non-understanding is not there. Anavabodha Nasti. So same, that is why, you know, you get all these funny things when people say, Ham Brahmosmi, or let me take a Tattvamasi. But you are not that. They will interpret it differently. Atattvamasi. You say that, but that's how they interpret it. Atattvamasi. But if Atattvamasi were the truth, why do you need Shastra? I know already. Everybody knows. My ignorant, uneducated fellow also knows, who has no idea of Shastra. Because that's how a human being works. Prakriti, I remember we said that, no, here only. Prakrita buddhi. You don't need any Shastra there. Shastra is there because what I think I know is not right. What looks apparent is not right. Therefore, I need Shastra and a Guru to help me understand. Pochyamana Brahmatma Bhutena Acharyena Ananyataya Prokte Atmani Agatihi Nasti. Then, Bhavatyevavagati, we'll break it. Bhavatyeva
Bhavati eva
Bhavati eva
Agatihi
agatihi
Ad Vishaya
tad vishaya
Otuhu
shrotuhu
Ad Asmi Aham
tad
tad
asmi
asmi
aham
aham
Ti Acharyasya Iva Ityarthaha.
iti acharyasya.
What is Acharya? The Acharya here is Ananya Acharya. Ananya Acharya is one who has understood the Ananyatvam. Aham Brahmosmi. One who has understood that, then what happens? Think about it. Eva bhavati eva avagatihi tad vishaya shrotuhu. The student, the one who is hearing. Tad asmi aham. Also understands exactly the same way the Acharya understands. Aham tadasmi. Iti acharyasya iva. Like the Acharya who is teaching with Ananya Acharya, he also understands. When taught by Ananya Acharya on the Vishaya of the Ananya Atma, the student also becomes the same. Right? This is the beauty of this kind of knowledge. When the Acharya teaches, he creates another Jnani who is a potential teacher, who is capable of teaching in his own way, in his own language, in his own examples, with his own interpretation, not interpretation, with his own level of clarity. He creates, which is what Swami Dayananda has been doing. He's created so many teachers. So generally, if you find you go to any one of these teachers, as many of you have gone to many of these teachers, they will say the same thing. Because there is nothing else to say. If your understanding is right, if your Ananya Bhava is there, if the Atma you understood as Ananya, there is no way you will say anything else. Therefore, all these 250, 300 teachers that Swamiji has created, you go to any one of their classes, you will find the same thing. Because that is the truth. There is no interpretation involved there. There is no application of one's own buddhi to recreate that. Buddhi is used only for enhancing the communication. Because you use different language. Somebody is sitting in Brazil and talking in Portuguese. Somebody is sitting in Japan and talking in Japanese, but exactly the same thing. Somebody who is 25 years old is giving examples which are probably more current and using words which are more understood by youngsters of today. Somebody who is 75 like me tends to use examples from the past. That's all the difference. The medium is the same, the message is the same. Therefore, the student also becomes exactly the same, like Acharya. Acharya Saiva Tat Aham Asmi. Rephrasing of Tattvamasi. I is Brahman. There is no more I am. I am implies an individuality. I am implies an ahankara. There is no I in that sense. There is no I which is a part of divinity. There is no I which is a dasa of infinity. I is, period. That understanding will come to the student, Shishya, the Shrotuhu, who is working with a Acharya who is Ananya Acharya, Shrotriya Brahmanishta. So he's given these 4 different ways of understanding this two, especially these 2 words, Ananya and Gatihi. And you need this. Without this, gaining this knowledge is not possible. So in the last bit of this, he says, Ananya prokte gati atra nasti, aniyan hi atarkyam anupramanat. This knowledge, the word anu is often used to show subtlety. The brain has to be able to grasp that subtlety. This is aniyan, smaller than the smallest we can think of, which is the atom. It is atarkyam. We will talk more about it in the next mantra, but he introduces the idea of atarkyam. What is tarka? I observe certain things. As a scientist, I observe certain things. And from there, I make an inference. And in making that inference, I draw upon all the knowledge that's already available. I draw upon all the examples that are already available. So you use that logically to arrive at an inference. But look at the process and the dangers of this process. My observation itself could be flawed. Which is why, for example, when we make judgments on people, we are often wrong. Because we never have complete data. We have only partial data. And some of it may be incorrect. Observations, that's why in design of experiments, Dr. Mahalingam will endorse this. You do repeatability over and over and over again.
Yes.
As much as possible, you get that as accurately as you can. You still might miss many. That's the nature of observations. I know when I started my life as a researcher, I had a senior called Subramaniam. He was a statistician. But one thing I learned from him, you get a jumble of data. Jumble of data, numbers. Mainly numbers. In some form, we convert into numbers. But to look at the whole set of numbers and to be able to see patterns, to be able to see how it is moving, what are the kind of commonalities that are appearing again and again. That itself is a great art. It's something that I learned from him. It requires a lot of patience. It requires application. But one might miss it. One might miss it in the jumble of data. So at the data level itself, there's a problem. Then this data has to be augmented by what is already known. Now, a lot of people might know a lot of things in this world, but what I know, what is available to me in my memory, or in my books, or in my library, whatever is available to me. These days, there's another source of error there, because you go to the internet to find out half the stuff in internet is incorrect. So you get incorrect data also from there. So again, there's a problem, possibility of error. And then the interpretation, I use my buddhi to interpret that data and the pattern in the data, supplemented by this data from the memory and comparing them, I interpret that to arrive at a possible hypothesis. So I'm excited. I'm ready for a research paper, publish. Then I have to do one more step. Having formulated this hypothesis, logical, all this is what we call logic, step by step. I have to then design experiment which will either confirm or negate my hypothesis. But as a scientist, as somebody who has already formulated an inference, I don't want any data which will negate what I'm saying, because all the effort I've done will go waste. So I'm always looking for designing up an experiment to collect data which will only validate my hypothesis. That is all this tarka. And you have some very silly things you can come out of tarka. Tarka is logic. I love this. Grass is green. The dress I'm wearing is green. Therefore, my dress is grass. Logic. You cannot fault it. So, if you use tarka, even on the things for this jagat, there are problems. And if you use tarka to understand Atma, then you have bigger problems. And yet you can't do without tarka, without logic. If you do it without logic, you're basically saying what every other religion is saying. You follow because I'm telling you so. That is also not correct. So what do you do? Do you use logic or you don't use logic? What is your source of knowledge? What is your pramana? My pramana for collecting data is all my eyes, ears, etc., etc. I collect all the data. But I have already a problem there where as far as Atma is concerned, because they're all paranchikani. They're all outward looking. They cannot give me data on the Atma. And if they can't give me data on the Atma, how am I going to use logic to understand the Atma? How am I going to use logic to arrive at what is the nature of Atma? Not going to happen. So in addition to all the other problems, there is an additional problem in this case because the very data collection instrument is incapable, inadequate. How are you going to do that? So you have the whole set of problems, and one has to question, how am I going to understand Atma? Do I use tarka or you don't use tarka? What do I do with the data that I can get by these five senses? Because I have some Shraddha in the Shastra, I accept the data that I get from the Shastra also. Now the data that I get from the Shastra seems to contradict the data that I have collected in the world otherwise. How am I going to interpret this? So I just drop this whole idea of logic in this thing and only follow because I have accepted a Guru and the Guru says so that I have to accept because Guru says you accept what I say. This is one knowledge where you cannot do that. Religions tell you generally, I am telling you, therefore you follow because I am the Guru. Till the next Guru comes. And the next Guru says, no, don't follow him. Follow what I tell you. One Guru says, if you follow what I tell you, you will go to heaven. And there you will find, you like mango? You will find mango trees in your house. Nice, luscious mango. Other fellow comes up and says, hey, he's talking incomplete. You follow me. I will take you to heaven, where you not only have mango trees, but you also have a lot of other things. Somebody else will come. So that simply following what somebody says cannot be valid. Simply following logic cannot be valid. So what do I do? Good question to contemplate upon for a week and then revisit it in the next class on Saturday. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om